All right, so you've been working with Microsoft Fabric, building these data pipelines, and you want to make sure you're not like falling into any traps. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into a detail that can trip up even like the most seasoned Fabric developers, like how variables actually work.
Yeah, it's one of those things that seems so simple,
Hmm.
like on the surface.
Yeah.
But then it can lead to some like really big headaches if you're not careful.
Exactly. And so that's why we are checking out this article called Don't Use Set Variable Activity in Data Factory Pipeline, Microsoft Fabric. It was published just last month, January 2025, on uselessai.in by Shrest Shukla. He's a Microsoft Fabric developer over at EY. And he actually ran into this exact problem with his data pipelines where everything looked right, but the data just wasn't copying correctly.
Those are the worst problems to have. You're staring at your pipeline and you're sure everything's set up right, but the data's just not going where it's supposed to.
Right. And it turns out the culprit was, like we said, variables, but not in the way you might initially think. So Shikla was working with a pretty standard pipeline, right? Designed to copy data from Blob to OneLake. And he was using a for each activity to speed things up by processing the data in parallel. And within this whole setup, he was using variables to dynamically create destination folders for the copied data. Seems like a smart way to keep things organized. And flexible, right?
Totally. Yeah, dynamic folder creation. That's like a pretty common practice.
Yeah.
Makes your pipelines way more adaptable. You can handle a lot of different kinds of data inputs that way.
Right. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of the data ending up in these nice, neat designated folders, the files were all over the place, just scattered.
It's like setting up a system of labeled boxes
Yeah.
and then coming back to find everything just completely jumbled together.
Exactly. So what was going on? What was the root of all this data chaos? Well, it turns out variables in Fabric pipelines, they operate a little differently than you might assume, like if you're coming from a traditional programming background, right? They are pipeline level, not activity level.
Oh, yeah. That is a super important distinction. Think of it like this. Imagine you're setting a variable in your pipeline to hold the name of your output folder. And then you've got multiple parts of your pipeline running at the same time. And they're all trying to change that variable simultaneously.
Uh-oh. That sounds like a recipe for disaster, like some kind of data collision.
Exactly. That's exactly what was happening in Shukla's pipeline. One part of the pipeline was trying to assign a value to the variable, and another part running at the same time would just overwrite it before the Foimper could even use it.
Oh, wow. So it's
Yeah, it's like if you had, you know how we were talking about measuring cups before?
Right. Yeah.
Like if you had a bunch of chefs all trying to use the same measuring cup at the same time, each pouring in different ingredients.
And you just end up with this weird mix that doesn't look like anything you were trying to make.
Exactly, a total mess. And the funny thing is, Shukla actually found this quote from a Microsoft article that sums this up perfectly. It says, variables are not thread safe, which basically means they're not designed to be. Accessed and modified by multiple processes at the same time without potentially causing these conflicts. And this problem, it's not even just limited to Fabric. You can run into this in Azure Data Factory too.
Oh, really? So it's a broader thing to be aware of with these kinds of tools.
Yeah, definitely.
So how did Shukla end up fixing this whole variable mayhem? Did he have to completely rethink his entire pipeline?
Well, no, actually. The solution was surprisingly simple. He just switched the for each loop from parallel processing to sequential processing.
So instead of having all these processes running at the same time, he forced them to run one after the other.
Exactly. By processing those files sequentially, he made sure that each iteration of the loop had exclusive access to that variable, which prevented all those conflicts. They were causing the data to end up all over the place.
So it's even though you're aiming for speed, sometimes taking that step-by-step approach with variables, it can actually save you from some major errors down the line.
Absolutely. It's a great example of how understanding the underlying mechanics of how these things work can lead to solutions that are simple, but super effective. Sometimes slowing down a little bit can actually help you reach your destination more accurately.
That's a good point. So the real lesson here isn't about avoiding set variable activities altogether, right?
Right.
It's more about being aware of how variables operate within these Fabric pipelines, especially when you're dealing with parallel processing.
Exactly. This whole deep dive really highlights the importance of not just knowing the syntax or how to drag and drop activities in a pipeline. You need to actually understand the nuances of how things work under the hood. If you want to build pipelines that are truly robust and reliable.
Right. It's like knowing how to drive a car. versus understanding how the engine actually works. You can get from point A to point B either way, but having that deeper knowledge allows you to troubleshoot problems more effectively.
Totally. It's a great analogy.
And speaking of insights, Shukla ended his article with a really interesting question. He asked his readers to consider what other seemingly insignificant details in fabric might actually have a huge impact on their pipelines.
Oh, that's a good one. That's like a challenge to all of us to really think critically about our assumptions.
Right, like what other things are we just taking for granted that could be causing us problems down the line?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a call to, go beyond just following tutorials and really explore the depths of this platform and see what we can discover.
I love that. It's like we're all explorers
Mm.
venturing into uncharted territory.
Kinda, yeah. Who knows what we might find out there?
Exactly. And those discoveries, they could lead to like way more efficient, more robust, more reliable data pipelines.
That's the goal.
For sure.
So, all right. It sounds like we've got a lot to think about here. And maybe we can even uncover some of those hidden gems ourselves.
Definitely. There's always more to learn.
Always.
And that's part of what makes this field so exciting.
That's true. All right, well, on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, but we've only just scratched the surface of this topic.
Yeah, we have.
So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to check out Shukla's full article over on uselessai.in. He shares some additional insights and resources that can really help you level up your fabric expertise.
It's definitely worth a read.
It is. And remember, this deep dive wasn't just about solving one specific problem. It was about showing how taking a closer look at something that seems really basic, like variables, can actually unlock a much deeper understanding of how fabric operates.
Absolutely. It's about
Yeah.
realizing that.
Mm-hmm.
Even in familiar territory, there are always new insights to be gained.
Exactly. So keep experimenting, keep asking those why questions, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Microsoft Fabric.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right. Well, until next time, happy data wrangling, everybody.
Happy data wrangling.
Okay.
So this is kind of like those measuring cups we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Except in this case, you've got multiple chefs all trying to use the same measuring cup at the same time. And they're all pouring in different ingredients.
Oh, I see what you mean. And then it's just a total mess.
Exactly. And the funny thing is, Shukla actually found a quote from a Microsoft article that perfectly sums up this issue. It says, variables are not thread safe,
Okay.
which essentially means that they're not designed to be accessed and modified by multiple processes at the same time without potentially causing these conflicts.
Right. That makes sense.
And this problem isn't limited to Fabric either. You can run into this in Azure Data Factory as well.
So it's like a broader thing with these kinds of tools.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of.
So how did Shukla actually resolve this variable mayhem? Did he have to completely rethink his whole pipeline?
The solution was actually pretty straightforward. He just switched the for each loop from parallel processing to sequential processing.
Oh, okay. So instead of all those processes happening at the same time, they just run one after the other.
Exactly. By processing the files sequentially, he made sure that each iteration of the loop had exclusive access to the variable.
Hmm.
So you avoid those conflicts that were causing the data to end up in the wrong folders.
I see. So even though you're kind of aiming for speed, sometimes taking that step-by-step approach with the variables can prevent bigger errors down the line.
Absolutely. It's like sometimes slowing down a bit can actually help you reach your destination more accurately.
Okay, that's a good point. So it seems like the takeaway here isn't necessarily to avoid set variable activities altogether, but rather to be mindful of how variables actually operate in Fabric pipelines, especially when we're working with parallel processing.
Precisely. And I think this deep dive really highlights the importance of not just knowing the syntax or how to drag and drop activities in a pipeline, but actually understanding the nuances of how things work under the hood.
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to build robust and reliable data pipelines.
It's like knowing how to drive a car versus understanding how the engine works.
That's a great analogy.
You can get from point A to point B either way,
Mm.
but knowing how the engine works lets you troubleshoot issues more effectively.
Exactly.
And speaking of insights, Shukla ended his article with a really interesting question.
Oh, yeah.
He challenged his readers to consider what other seemingly insignificant details in Fabric might actually have a significant impact on their pipelines.
Yeah, what other little things are we missing?
Exactly.
That's a good reminder that there's always more to learn and that we shouldn't take anything for granted.
It's like a challenge to all of us to go beyond simply following tutorials and really explore the depths of this platform.
I love that. It's like we're all explorers venturing into uncharted territory.
That's a great way to put it.
And who knows, those discoveries might lead to more efficient, more robust, more reliable data pipelines.
That's what we like to hear. Yeah, it's like we thought we knew the whole map,
Hmm.
but then we find out there's this like whole secret passage we didn't even know existed.
Right. And you never know
Yeah,
what you might find in there. Could be amazing, could be dangerous.
exactly. So for you, our listener out there, you're now armed with this knowledge about variables and how they can act in, kind of unpredictable ways. What does this mean for you as you're working with Fabric?
It means, hopefully, you can avoid those frustrating debugging sessions.
Yeah.
Where you're just like banging your head against the wall, trying to figure out why your data isn't going where it's supposed to.
Right, exactly.
And it means you're building more reliable pipelines.
Ah.
Pipelines that you can actually trust.
And it's not just about like this one specific problem with variables. It's about developing that mindset of like really paying attention to the details.
Exactly, because those seemingly small details, they can have a huge impact.
Totally.
Hmm.
And to help you on that journey, like we really encourage you to check out Shukla's full article. It's over on uselessai.in. He goes into a lot more detail there.
Yeah, he's got some great insights in there.
He does. And, it's a good reminder that, like, we can always learn more, especially when it comes to a platform as complex as Fabric.
Oh, absolutely. There's always something new to discover.
Always.
And that's what keeps things interesting, right?
That's right. So keep experimenting. Don't be afraid to try new things.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, ask those, like, why questions.
Why is this happening? How does this work?
Exactly, because those are the questions that will lead you to those, like, deeper levels of understanding.
And that's how you become a true Fabric master.
All right, well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up. Any final thoughts?
Just keep learning, keep exploring,
Mm-hmm.
and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Fabric.
I love it. All right, well, until next time, happy data wrangling, everybody.
Happy data wrangling.